Every day, war, poverty and political unrest force thousands of people to leave their homelands in search of a better life. Their journeys are often dangerous. Many fall victim to traffickers, others are turned away, some die. So why do so many people risk it all? And what is being done to protect them? This is Inside Story. Hello there and a warm welcome to this programme. I'm Laura Kyle. There are now more refugees than at any time since 1994. That's according to the United Nations. But they don't always reach their destinations. Earlier this month, more than 300 Eritrean and Somali asylum seekers drowned when their fishing boat sank off the Italian island of Lampedusa. But despite huge risks, refugees continue to make this dangerous crossing from North Africa to Europe on an almost daily basis. Now, Lampedusa lies southwest of Sicily, but it's actually closer to Africa, just over 100 kilometres from the coast of Tunisia. For years, it's been a stepping stone for undocumented migrants seeking a better life in Europe. More than 8,000 refugees arrived on Lampedusa in the first 9 months of this year. Barnaby Phillips is there and sent this report.
It's been voted the most beautiful beach in Europe, but how easy it is to forget the drama and tragedy that plays out every day just a few miles offshore from Lampedusa. The Italian Navy has sent one of its biggest ships to help with the crisis. We were allowed on board and in the hold found a pathetic cargo. 318 people picked up at sea the previous night. Most of the Africans are young men. Many are Eritreans. They paid smugglers thousands of dollars to flee their country.
From Eritrea to Sudan, by the Sahara, it is very dangerous. So many young persons are dead.
And then there are the Syrians, of all ages. None of them know what will happen next. Some are too young to understand where they are. They're registered straight away. The Navy will take them directly to Sicily, because Lampedusa is struggling with the migrants it already has. But this is not just an Italian problem.
No, definitely not, also because the biggest part of these immigrants wish to go in Germany, Norway, in other parts of Europe that in this moment have a more flourishing economy. This is an historical situation in which people are leaving their homeland because of the change of the climate, because of wars, and so it's a massive activity.
This is the centre which the Italian authorities built to house migrants on Lampedusa. It was built for 250, maximum 300 people, but there's always a lot more than that here these days. At the moment, there are over 700 inside. We were not given permission to enter.
So, through the fence, we spoke to Mohammed from Damascus. How was his sea journey to Lampedusa?
So dangerous, so crowded, the waves, and the sea, like you see it's too dangerous.
What do you want now? What is your dream for the future?
To complete my studies, to have respect.
Lampedusa was a sleepy place, known for fishermen and sunsets, but now it has a fame it never desired, as the island which people risk everything to reach. Barnaby Phillips, Al Jazeera, Lampedusa.
Well, there's lots to talk about, and here today to do just that are three guests. Joining us via Skype from Copenhagen, Mikael Riebenbeck, Deputy Director General of the Swedish Migration Board. Now, Mikael initiated a project that granted Syrian asylum seekers permanent rights of residency in Sweden, the only country so far to do so. Then in London, we have Jamal Osman, and he's a former refugee from Somalia who has settled in the UK. And in Geneva, we have Volker Turk, Director of International Protection with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Thank you all very much for being with us. So, Jamal, I'm going to start with you, if I may, because in Barnaby's report, we got a real sense of desperation there. I mean, it's quite hard to imagine what pushes people to take such enormous risks with these journeys. Perhaps you could tell us why you left Somalia over 10 years ago and whether that was a difficult decision to make.
So for some people, they might think it's a choice, but for many immigrants and refugees, there is no choice but to leave your homeland. I mean, no one wants to leave his or her own country where you were born, grow up, and have your family and everyone you know. But circumstances force people to leave their homeland. And in my case, I mean, Somalia is a well-known, we had a civil war which started in the late 80s, and the late president left in 1991. So there was a clan war between different Somali clans. And I was there till 1999, just hoping things would improve. I mean, leaving Somalia, coming back to Somalia, leaving and going to neighboring countries and coming back. And then in 1999, I decided it was probably not going to get any better. So I just had to go and seek a better life. And I went to Kenya and then to another African country and ended up here in Europe. So obviously, it was my decision to leave because my other family members, some of my brothers, still stayed in Somalia and they didn't want me to leave. But I felt I had no choice but to leave Somalia because I wasn't feeling safe. I didn't see any future of staying in Somalia. So, and for many refugees, it's the same.
And how did you get out? How old were you? And you travelled by yourself, it sounds like. How did you actually travel out and end up in the United Kingdom?
I mean, I was about 20 in 1999. So I went to Kenya, which has a border with Somalia, and then paid human smugglers. But in my case, I was probably lucky because I had some money to pay human smugglers who took me to another African country and then here to Europe. But for many other refugees who have no money to pay human smugglers, then they often go to places like Libya and then try and get to Europe from there. In the case you mentioned in Lampedusa is a very good example. So people go different places, but because I had money from family members and relatives, I was able to pay the human smugglers. And it took a while to get them and to gain their trust, and they showed me how to go through airports and gave me a bit of practice, and that's where they took me to Kenya and then to another country and then here in Europe. So it was a long journey, but compared to those who are going through Libya, probably mine was a very simple, straightforward one.
Volker Turk, I mean, these journeys often involve these human smugglers, don't they? And it's hard, isn't it, to overestimate just how ruthless they can be and just how vulnerable these migrants are once they're in their hands.
Absolutely. I mean, as you know, human smuggling and trafficking is a big business. It's organized crime. At the same time, I think it also has to be said that, unfortunately, in many parts of the world, legal entry for refugees is not possible. So you will, as a result, see an increase in so-called irregular migration, including attempts by refugees and asylum seekers to enter a country in an irregular way, which is sometimes for them the only way to escape and to seek safety. This is very unfortunate, but that's how it is, I'm afraid to say.
And these smugglers, they create situations where these refugees, these asylum seekers can die, they can be kidnapped. Do you think when people are in their home countries and they're assessing the risks, they are fully aware of the extent of them?
I think that's one of the big problems. First of all, many refugees who have to escape obviously do this, as Jamal has just been saying, not because of circumstances that they take light. These are not easy and light decisions. These are very, very difficult decisions to make. And they have to escape because of conflict, because of war, because of human rights abuses, because of persecution. So they're actually compelled to flee. And if they're not enter another country legally, they actually have to do that in an irregular manner, and that's what often happens in these circumstances. And so some people, some criminals have made a business out of this, which is very unfortunately, because they actually prey on very vulnerable populations. But I think it's important to make a very clear distinction between the criminal act of the smugglers and the people who are victims of smuggling and trafficking. And that's actually already foreseen in the international legal instruments that deal with smuggling and trafficking, that one has to make a very clear distinction between smugglers and the people who are being smuggled, because they're victims and one should treat them as such.
Absolutely, and often they're not. Mikael Riebenvik, you, of course, were instrumental in your country throwing open the doors to Syrian refugees. I'd like to address why that was in just a moment, but first, just to stick to these reasons that people leave. And you, again, must have heard some, or come across some very harrowing stories from these refugees who arrive in Sweden.
Oh yes, there's many stories. It's a great hardship going into Europe these days, and we all heard about the terrible tragedies on the Mediterranean. What we have been doing, this conflict has been going on for 2.5 years now, more than that, and since a year and a half, we're granting everybody residency permits. So that's nothing new. The new thing that we did from September and on is that we said that we'll have permanent permits. And the reason for that is, well, that's national law in Sweden. That's our presumption, is when you need a protection. If it's not a very clear conflict that will just last for a short time, we will give permits, permanent permits. We did that with Bosnia. We did that a few years ago with Iraq, the Iraq crisis. And so this is an outcome of national legislation.
When these Syrians arrive in Sweden, what sort of process do they go through? Because, of course, we see these detention centres in Lampedusa and other countries of original origin, and you see hundreds of people crammed in together. They seem to be there for a long time. In Sweden, what's the process, and is it a faster process than we're seeing in places like Lampedusa?
Well, what happens when you arrive to Sweden and you apply for asylum is that you will be taken to a transit center where you will stay for a couple of days. You're not locked up. It's not a detention center. We'll process your application and then you will get accommodation. The normal accommodation in Sweden are normal apartments, flats in the cities. That's it's inexpensive. But now we had over 40,000 people claiming for asylum so far this year, and we're expecting 55 to 60,000 this year. So our normal accommodation are full. We don't have the apartments. So now we're getting different kind of accommodation, and there you will stay for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, depending on how long your case will be processed. After that, if you get a permanent permit, you will go out to the municipalities, and this is where we have trouble right now because there's not enough places in the municipalities.
Okay, Jamal, I just want to ask at this point how that compared to your experience when you arrived in the UK.
I mean, my experience when I came to the UK in 1999, I was sharing a room with another Somali, and I was given a £35 worth food voucher, so no cash, until the Home Office or the immigration officials make a decision about your application. So you have to survive on that, and they don't really consider that you have left a terrible tragedy behind. You have been through a lot, and you need big help as opposed to being treated as subhuman when you come here. That's what I mean. I would say probably Britain is the best in Europe to be an immigrant, but even so, it's not a good place when you are an immigrant. And I remember you can only shop with that voucher to at a particular supermarket, and we used to walk for an hour to do our shopping, and then you can't buy everything that you need. You can only buy certain things. So there are so many restrictions, so many rules when you're an immigrant, which doesn't meet your needs, if you like. So and you could be in that situation for years until the immigration officials make a decision. But in my case, it was a year, so it was a tough one to deal. But for many immigrants, it's much longer than that.
It does seem like there's a distinct lack of sympathy. We'll be looking a bit more at integration issues in just a moment. First of all, just to remind people that most migrant arrivals by boat to the EU land in these southern EU countries, such as Italy and Malta. Now, they've appealed for more support and resources. And this has prompted the European Commission to press for greater resources to survey and patrol sea routes. Now, the opening of more channels of regular migration. Also, increased cooperation with countries of origin and transit, especially, as was mentioned before, Libya. Also, spreading migrants more evenly across the EU. Malta's Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat, told Al Jazeera the current situation is increasingly desperate.
We are verging on the unsustainable now. And honestly, something needs to be done. First of all, the people who get their application refused need to go back. And I do believe that we need to convey the message that there should be legal ways in which to reach Europe, and that Europe is not the promised land of milk and honey, but really a place where there are problems, and people should not expect a solution to all their woes just like that, overnight.
Jamal, as we were just saying, there is a distinct lack of sympathy. Volker Turk, sorry, if we could just turn to you for a second, because we haven't heard from you for a while. What do you think needs to be done?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that need to be done rather urgently. One is to increase the search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean Sea. I think a lot of very good work is being done by coast guards, especially Italian Coast Guard and the Maltese Coast Guard, by fishermen, even by shipmasters. But that's not enough. I think we need much more engagement, much more patrolling in the Mediterranean Sea to ensure that vessels are picked up that clearly are unseaworthy. The second thing that needs to be done, there needs to be a clear, predictable agreement on disembarkation at a place of safety. And it cannot just be on one or two islands like Lampedusa or Pantelleria in Italy or Malta. It has to be done in a more reinforced and consolidated way across Europe. I think one of the things that always strike me is when it comes to the high seas, it's considered a common heritage of humanity. But I think we have to move from considering the high seas and the wealth of the high seas as a common heritage of humanity and include the humans in that, because that's obviously what really triggers an international response and triggers international responsibility sharing. And I think it's that shift of mindset that needs to take place.
Absolutely. Jamal, of course, no leader in the EU, of course, wants to see these pictures, these awful pictures of people drowning. But equally, none of them seem to be terribly willing to stick their neck out on this issue, because domestically it is a very politically sensitive issue, and there is growing opposition throughout the EU to migrants arriving in the country. Are you feeling that in England at all?
Yes, it's a big issue in the UK. It has been a big issue since I arrived here 14 years ago. I mean, the British media, some section of the British media, in particular the right wing, I can say they have negative stories about immigrants on a daily basis. And that plays into the hands of the society. The British government have been introducing new controversial laws saying illegal immigrants should go home and all the rest of it. So all this, I think, influences the society. And if you're an immigrant in the UK, for instance, as I said, probably Britain, in my experience, and I have traveled through Europe and I have relatives and friends across Europe, probably Britain is a good place to be an immigrant compared to other European countries. But even so, if you are working, if you're an immigrant and working, People will complain about you because you're taking British jobs from British people. If you're not working, they will say you're claiming benefit and you're not contributing to the society. If you have a child, they would say, oh, you're straining the health service or the school and everything. So no matter what you do, you cannot win if you're an immigrant. You're condemned as an immigrant. And that's, I mean, I say as an immigrant, that's how I feel. And for many immigrants, and even for the society, I used to work as a taxi driver when I was studying journalism. And I remember when you pick up passengers, one of the first questions they ask is, where are you from? When are you going back to your country? So there is that feeling of you being unwanted, unwelcome, and everyone saying you should go back to your country. And that is a daily experience for many immigrants. So even if you settle here and have a British passport, it's still, and even immigration officials, I travel frequently through Heathrow Airport, and every time I'm coming back, I'm stopped and asked the same question I was asked 14 years ago when I was seeking asylum here. So though I would say it's okay life, but again, it's not comfortable to be an immigrant.
Mikhail, is it a similar situation in Sweden? What's the response there to the people, to these thousands of Syrians who are landing in the country?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I have great respect for the situation in southern Europe, Greece, Malta, Italy, but most of the people continue on and seek asylum in Germany and in Sweden. And of course, it's a real challenge for us to cope with this. About 60,000 people coming to our country this year. In Germany, probably well over 100,000 asylum seekers this year. And I think it's time for Europe to pull together. We have a huge, maybe the largest refugee crisis ever on our threshold, and we have to work together. For instance, we have the resettlement scheme where Sweden has been working together with the UNHCR for almost 50 years, taking people from camps to Europe. That's a legal way in. Europe today has about 5,800 resettlement places, and whereof Sweden are taking 1,900. So you can see that we could do more. We are 28 countries now, and if everybody in Europe would take the same amount per capita as Sweden, we would have well over 100,000 resettlement places. For
a lot of people, if I can just interrupt for a second, because a lot of people are very concerned about the economic impact of having a lot of refugees land on their doorstep. What's been the actual case that you've seen there in Sweden in regards to that?
Well, of course, there's a strain. It costs money, but we're also seeing that these are people in need of protection, and we need to step up when it's life in the balance. There's lives in the balance here. So this is what we have to do. We all committed, all European countries committed to the Geneva Convention, and this is what we committed to do. So, and of course, if Europe would pull together and have a coherent approach to this, the impact wouldn't be on just a few countries. I think 70% of all asylum seekers are currently coming to 5 European countries.
Okay, the EU, Volker Turk, has set a December deadline to take some action on this issue. Do you see the continent pulling together by that point?
I think there is indeed a lot more emphasis, not least as a result of these horrific events that took place in Lampedusa and the drowning and the loss of life at sea that occurred. I think it's interesting also what Mikhail said, because the resettlement and relocation scheme within the EU is indeed one that we are very much looking forward to, and we work very closely with Sweden and a number of other countries in the EU to ensure that people can be taken from their current host countries into one of the EU countries. But I think, as Michael was saying, I think it falls on too few countries within the European Union, and we need a much larger approach.
Okay.
And it means, for instance, simplified family unification by all European countries, not just by a few.
Jamal, 30 seconds left of the show. Last word to you. What advice would you give to anyone seeking to flee their country?
I think they should think twice because it's not as everyone expects. When you come here, it's a long process. It could be a horrendous experience, and it's not as easy or good as you think. So think twice before you come here, I would say.
OK, a very sober note to end our discussion on there today. Thanks very much to all our guests for being with us. In Copenhagen, Mikael Ribanvik. In London, Jamal Osman. And in Geneva, Volker Turk. And thanks very much to you two for joining us. We always welcome your feedback, and you can email us your thoughts to insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Laura Kyle, from me and the Inside Story team. Bye for now.